Welcome to tonight's program, Data Centers and Communities, Social and Environmental Impacts. Our presenter, Rachel Young, is a PhD candidate at Loyola University Chicago in the School of Social Work. Her research explores community responses to digital infrastructure development, specifically by examining the interconnectedness found between the social, political, environmental, and economic systems. It's a big deal, big stuff. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome you, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you to everybody here. I can't see you, but I can see your names on the screen. And like Ashley said, any questions that come up, feel free to use that Q&A feature. I will just dive right in. Okay. So I am talking to you today about data centers and communities, social and environmental impacts. First, I'll go through a brief introduction, give you a little bit more info of who I am and how I came to this work. Then I want to just break down what is a data center, build a shared understanding. There's a lot of information that's coming out right now, and things are evolving really quickly. And we all are coming with different levels of understanding. So I want to share that. Then we'll discuss where are they currently, the environmental and social impacts that we know of right now, how communities are responding, and then a discussion of what's next and any questions that you all might have. So I am originally from Illinois. I'm from Palatine, Illinois. And then I spent about 10 years in Minnesota and about 5 years in Washington, all as an adult, before returning back to Chicago to begin this PhD program. I am a social worker by training. I've worked in communities in local nonprofits, national nonprofits, across government entities, and I also worked in tech. I managed program operations at two different ed tech corporations, and we focused on cybersecurity training, um, software engineering, UX, UI design, and data science. I just finished my fourth year as a PhD candidate at Loyola, and I came to this work because during what would that be, my second year of the doctoral program, that's when ChatGPT became publicly accessible. And I was really intrigued by it, having worked in tech. It was also in being in higher ed at the time, there was a lot of rapid conversations. Many of you are probably aware of them, how this was changing education, how this was changing a lot of things. And as I was trying to learn more about this development, I kept seeing something pop up that would be, through a meme or a headline or an article that I was reading, that ChatGPT is thirsty, or one query was the equivalent of X amount of water. And I kept reading that and I realized, like, I don't really know what that means. And so I looked into it, and that was my entry point into this topic, and eventually what led me to the area of my dissertation. So background for this talk and of my broader work is that there's a critical gap. So right now, as I mentioned, technology is rapidly changing. We're in what's called the fourth industrial revolution. It's reshaping our core infrastructures. And there's new information coming out daily. I was talking with Ashley hourly even. There's probably going to be developments that are occurring while we're in this talk. And so this is an emerging issue that is evolving. And so this is a snapshot in time. There's discussion in social work and broader addressing the AI ethics and AI integration to the field, as well as into other fields. However, the impact of data center infrastructure on communities remains underexplored. And what we're seeing is that vulnerable communities are bearing the brunt of these consequences. As this is an emerging issue, what's shaping public understanding currently is news and media coverage, municipal communications, press releases, community meetings, community meeting minutes if you can't attend those meetings, corporate messaging around a development, a proposal, or the operations of one, and publicly available documents. And so this presentation draws on available academic literature as well as all of those because we're piecing this together in real time. Okay, so what is a data center? A lot of our digital technologies have been largely abstracted from this physical counterpart. We talk about, something living in the cloud or going virtual, working remotely. It makes it feel immaterial. However, data centers are the physical infrastructures that underscore our servers, our devices, the hardware needed, all to power our online services and communications. If you haven't seen one, you can think a big warehouse. I have a image I'll show you shortly, but these are responsible for processing large amounts of data for critical business workloads. They're supporting nearly every sector: healthcare, business, education, manufacturing, government, retail. Data centers are powering everyday applications and technologies such as smart home devices like uh, an Alexa or an Echo. I don't know if they still make Echoes. A Ring camera, Ring doorbells, cloud computing services like Dropbox or Netflix, Google Drive, and AI tools like ChatGPT and Gemini. Here's a few images, and many of you have probably seen one, or if maybe you didn't know, but you've driven by one. They are very they're here in Illinois as well. But the top two photos are images of the exterior, what they look like from the outside. I included the one in the top right. It's at dusk, but it shows just how lit up these are. And that's something, light pollution, that we'll talk about in a little bit. The bottom two are images. These are all publicly available online. You can search what they look like, but this is the interior. Okay, so there are three types of data centers. We have enterprise data centers, which are when a company has their own data center on their own company property. They manage their own data processing and the facility. They maintain the operations, everything. Then we have co-location facilities and hyperscalers. And I have asterisks there because those are the two types of data centers that we'll be discussing today. So co-location facilities are commercially owned, often by commercial real estate companies. They act like a landlord, leasing out space, power, hardware. They manage the temperature control, all of that. Some of the big names, or two of them that I included here, are Equinix and Digital Realty. If you haven't seen those names yet, now that you've heard them, you might notice them in the articles that you read. Hyperscale data centers are the largest data centers. Some of them are up to 13 full-size soccer fields. They're run by major cloud service providers like Amazon, Google, Microsoft. These are really, prevalent in the news right now. So the United States has the largest concentration globally. Currently, there's over 45% located in the United States. Northern Virginia has the largest concentration in the world. It's also known as Data Center Alley. Data Center Alley emerged because they invested early in internet infrastructure. If anybody remembers mainframes or has, heard of mainframes, the proximity to DC, the access to the skilled workforce, and the available land and the affordable land that was available at the time allowed for data centers to grow pretty rapidly in that region. Other hubs are Northern California, Phoenix, Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago is one. Globally, we're seeing hubs emerge in Germany, the UK, India, Brazil, and Singapore. Growth is emerging rapidly, and there's a race to be the world's tech leaders. There's a market analysis report, that estimates that the data center market will reach $652 billion globally by 2030. Many are referring to this race as the data center economy. There's been recent growth. It's actually this is newer and maybe underexplored, but almost feels like common sense. But the pandemic actually accelerated and increased the demand for data centers because there were many sectors that went from in-person operations to fully remote. When folks were working from home, hybrid working increased demand, as well as the adoption of AI technologies. And it's important to note that data centers as a structure are not new, but with the proliferation is what's new. This is what is unprecedented, is the proliferation as a result of AI, as well as the hardware needed to operate data centers that power AI. So this is a screenshot. This is an interactive map. I actually took a new screenshot today because the numbers do change. But you can filter it. You can look at it globally. You can look at it nationally. You can go to the state, to the city. But it gives you a glimpse. The size of the circle corresponds with the number of data centers in that area. And you'll see the columns on the right-hand side of the image. Virginia is at the top with 631, and Illinois is fourth on that list. Okay, so diving into some of the environmental impacts that we know of right now. So data centers need to be maintained at a low temperature. This requires intensive cooling systems because servers generate heat. One of the most accessible explanations of that heat for me and for many folks is that if you've ever been working on your laptop and it's gotten really hot and overheated, that's an example of it needing a cooling system. So multiply that times, a billion. I haven't done that math, but these servers generate high amounts of heat, and in order to run at optimal speed and levels, they need to be at really specifically low temperatures, and they require specialized cooling systems. These cooling systems utilize water in a few ways. Data center cooling towers often evaporate water, which leaves behind a salty wastewater known as blowdown. And that blowdown is subsidized by public utilities. So local utilities are then treating that. Water is also used to generate electricity for data centers. Generating electricity is actually the second largest water consumer and the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases. A recent report from Environmental and Energy Study Institute found that one large data center consumes up to 1.8 billion gallons annually, which is the equivalent to 5 million gallons per day. Medium-sized data centers reach up to 300,000 gallons per day, which is the equivalent of about 1,000 US households. These cooling systems utilize whichever resource is cheapest to power them, not necessarily what is most sustainable, and water is often cheapest. 50% of servers are actually located in water-stressed regions, and the demand for fresh water exceeds the supply. There's a recent shift from older processing systems that were used for cloud computing, known as CPUs. You can think of it as like these are the computer chips we're talking about, to newer processing systems needed for AI, which are GPUs. GPUs generate more heat, which means it requires more water and more electricity for cooling data centers, AI data centers. The expansion of AI is predicted to cause global electricity consumption to double by 2030. The industry faces core decisions and trade-offs. I say data centers face a trade-off, but I'm speaking about the industry. So the industry trade-off is they must choose between options that either consume less water and use more electricity, or use less energy but consume more water. There's financial incentives to this water consumption. Like I mentioned earlier, water is often cheapest, and therefore data centers are financially incentivized to consume more water over options that might have greater energy efficiency. Overall, there's a lack of tracking. There's a huge lack of tracking and transparency regarding water consumption. It's poor. Historically, only about 1/3 of data centers track their water usage, and there is no industry reporting standard. So we don't actually know the full picture. This is important because a lot of times in these discussions and in this rapidly shifting environment, there's talk of increased cooling systems that use less water, or these are more efficient. And we don't have a baseline to compare that to. So, they're more efficient in what context? And that efficiency, the increase in efficiency or um, the how do I put this? The desire for an increase in efficiency or proposed efficiency gains is not equaling accountability. And accountability is really important in these contexts for us to understand the full scope and scale of these environmental impacts. Electricity for data centers are somewhat powered by renewable resources, but some is still provided by coal, oil, natural gas, and uranium. When those resources are consumed, they return carbon into the atmosphere, and an estimated 2.5 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent will be emitted by 2030 from data centers. Another layer to the environmental impact of data centers is the hardware they require to operate. There's a massive amount of clean water used in the manufacturing process. Hardware is comprised of critical minerals and metals such as silicon, gold, copper, aluminum, tantalum, cobalt. Local communities from which we are mining these resources to power data center infrastructures and other technologies experience disastrous environmental consequences. We are seeing water contamination, air pollution, soil degradation, as well as documented social impacts of exploitive labor practices and human rights violations from the communities in which these resources are mined. Another layer to this is that there is a lot of e-waste being generated. So with these updates, there is updated hardware that they require. And so we need to get rid of the existing hardware. And the e-waste contains toxins such as mercury and lead. Something that isn't discussed as much is the environmental impact of the concrete that data centers are consuming. So data centers require concrete. Here's an image. I believe this is a picture of one that was being built in Wisconsin. And concrete is a major contributor to climate change. CO2 is emitted from concrete production. There is energy consumption during production of the concrete, and it's responsible for 6% of greenhouse gas emissions. There is a need for green concrete solutions. However, we don't have them right now, or at least that are available in this context. And the American Cement Association's prediction is that the US will need approximately 1 million metric tons of cement to construct data centers to house or to meet the demand of AI technologies by 2028. Okay, so with this baseline understanding that we have a lack of transparency, we have a lack of industry reporting around water, electricity, and energy consumption, means we also have a lack of transparency on the scope and scale of the environmental harms, which means that we can learn a lot from people that are living in proximity to existing data centers. In many ways, they're our direct source to what the impacts are. As this is emerging and growing, they're in real time experiencing these. And so their perspective is critical as we navigate our path forward. Tech and real estate corporations are incentivized to build on the cheapest and most expansive land possible. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And this leads us to data centers being built primarily in disinvested, rural, and/or low-income communities, which is exacerbating existing structural inequalities. As data center expansion booms globally, it will increasingly affect more densely populated areas, cities, regions, and will have increasing effects on human well-being and our planet. When proposing to build a data center in a community, companies and corporations will utilize municipal level tax incentives, promises of economic growth and increased employment. We see that a lot. They also use NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, to often disguise the identity of the corporation. We're seeing that more and more. And a part of this proposal to the community is often an overarching opportunity to be a part of the future. This is the direction we're going. This is inevitable. This is your shot to, come along with us. And municipalities are often viewing these promised economic and tax incentives to be worth the environmental trade-offs because there's a feeling of inevitability. And if they do not accept them now, data center construction will begin elsewhere. And the communities who do accept them will reap the benefits that they would miss out on. And so to compete, they often offer tax breaks in the region. Despite these promised incentives of economic booms and employment in an area, there is a growing number of protests and data center resistance organizations that are emerging globally. People living in proximity to data centers are sharing resource strains on power grids, increased utility costs for residents, noise pollution, air pollution, water scarcity, ecosystem devastation. There's information about bird habitats and other habitats being disturbed or destroyed, as well as population displacement. There's documented people that are evicted because a data center is moving in or concern for gentrification. Will this bring in folks that then increases the cost of living in that area and they're no longer able to afford to live there? And then there's emerging research, and there's an article that was published last year that looked at the siting and permitting of data centers and found that data centers are following historical practices of redlining. And so this scholar, his name is Booker, he's coined the term digital redlining in that context. Okay, so globally, there's many examples that we could discuss. One of them, and actually one of the first ones that I came across as I was learning about this, occurred in Chile and Uruguay. And essentially, there was a community in Chile that a big tech corporation came in and proposed a data center. And initially, everyone, residents and local government, were really excited about this. They had been experiencing a drought. They were excited to be connected to potential economic benefits and employment. And as development was in process, there was a local group that read a report in full and saw how much water would be consumed by this data center. And the current state was that some people didn't even have access to water because of the drought in that region. And water was being piped in or bussed in. And so the community members were concerned and they organized specifically around the water impacts to that region. And the community was successful in mobilizing to stop the data center construction altogether. And this was seen as a huge win and a success for them because of that concern for their water. However, that company was able to pick up and move, and they built that development in Uruguay. And there was opposition in Uruguay related to water, but that data center was built. And these resistance efforts highlight local issues that are specific to that region. So if you look at Germany and Ireland, they're primarily organizing around energy consumption and strain on the grid. In contrast, like I mentioned, Chile and Uruguay efforts are focused on addressing issues related to the water consumption. Locally, in the US, about 10 years ago, community groups in Northern Virginia began to organize around adverse impacts. It's now a very large coalition that we've learned a lot from their work, which led to approximately $900 million in projects being blocked and $45.8 billion being delayed in the state. And even with that, there is still the largest concentration in that area. So emerging public health impacts, there was a recent study that was just published in 2026 in that they found that the public health burden of US data centers is going to push the burden up to $20 billion in 2028. And some of the long-term impacts of public health impacts that are documented are the noise and light pollution that I mentioned briefly earlier, which is related to hearing loss, stress, insomnia, and decreased quality of life. There's an analysis that I completed a few months ago. I'm still in the process of writing it up around what we can learn from residents in Northern Virginia. And one of the things that came up was the noise pollution, and residents reported living in their basements to avoid the noise. Increased risks that we know of are for children, developing fetuses, pregnant people, elderly, and individuals with chronic and respiratory or cardiovascular disease. And there's increasing environmental justice concerns as it's disproportionately affecting minority, rural, and low-income communities. I pulled some quotes. This is an example of one in Atlanta, Georgia. They say they're going to bring jobs, but the jobs that they bring are not the jobs that are actually needed because they are not sustainable. And that's speaking to the discussion, and this came up briefly at the very beginning when Ashley and I were talking before this started. But, as we're navigating all of the claims, what's happening, what's the reality? One of the components is this promise of employment, and employment, often the numbers are inflated because it accounts for the number of construction jobs that will be needed to complete construction. And so that's the context of it's not sustainable. These jobs will go away once the construction has been completed. The next one relates to the environment. I'm afraid to drink the water, but I still cook with it and brush my teeth with it. Am I worried about it? Yes. And I took a screen grab, but it's actually a video. You can see the clip. Okay, so in the United States, just in the 3 months of 2026, the first 3 months of 2026, I should say, Data Center Watch found that $130 billion worth of data center projects have been blocked or delayed by local opposition. Opposition is comprised of grassroots and formal organizations, coalitions, indigenous groups, and water protectors. One thing that is emerging is that it's a bipartisan opposition, and this was even the case in 2024 in an earlier report from Data Center Watch. A recent poll, I don't know if y'all can hear that, there's an ambulance behind me. I'm gonna let that pass. Okay, so there's a recent poll, a Gallup poll in March 2026, and there's a lot more in that report, but I took a screenshot, that's the top image, finding that the 3 prominent parties right now, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, that red, if you can't read it, if it's too small on the screen, the red and the orange, red is strongly opposed and orange is somewhat opposed. Communities are responding by enacting different levels of protections based on their local political environment, what's available to them, and the specifics around whatever the development is in the region or if it's in operation. So this is looking like moratoriums, efforts to define and restrict water users, community benefits agreements, noise mitigation, and enforcement mechanisms. There's examples of different coalitions that have formed. One of them is this Data Center Reform Coalition in Virginia. And then our neighbors in Indiana have a powerful coalition called Citizens Action Coalition. So, and I think there might be some questions, so we have definitely some time for that. But some thoughts for us to end with is that This is not a binary issue. Data center growth is reshaping our built and natural environments in a variety of ways that I just gave an overview of. And it's okay to be critical of any of the information we're facing, and it's critical that we engage as it is emerging. This phenomenon intersects with a variety of social and environmental justice issues. And, I encourage everyone, and I think we can all learn from each other to find what interests you and ask more questions. If you have concerns, are you concerned about communities living in proximity? Can you find a local community to learn from and support their efforts? Are you concerned about the environmental trade-offs? Is there a local environmental group you can learn from, or some advocacy you could do at the municipal level? Maybe you're excited about the economic benefits. Help us figure out who's benefiting from these, how are they benefiting? How can we increase those benefits for all? Who's left out of the benefits? How can we leverage those? If you're excited by the employment opportunities, help us look into who is hired. Where do they apply? Are they sustainable? There's folks doing that work right now. There's a lot of times reporters and journalists are on the front lines piecing together these claims. And it's also an evolving piece. Technology underpins just about all of our core infrastructures and industries, and the challenges facing us are consistently figuring out how is this changing our landscape? What choices do we have to advance environmental and social justice in this context? How can we proactively mitigate these issues that data centers are exacerbating? And how can we support the communities currently bearing the disproportionate costs of the digital era by living in proximity to data centers? I heard this analogy, this is not my own, but somebody explained it as if you can picture being out to eat, like a work dinner, let's say, and your employer, if we should all be so lucky, your employer is like, we're paying, we're footing the bill, get whatever you want. And you could get the fancy appetizer, you could get the fun drink, you could get whatever entree you want. And you're not having to pay for it. So you're not paying for that. You're reaping the benefits without having to pay for it. And that analogy is like, that's what's happening right now with corporations. They're able to do all of the things that they want right now with very limited accountability measures in place. And that is changing and that is shifting. Public perception is changing really quickly in this area, but there's still a lot of room to grow. A lot of room to grow. How does this phenomenon intersect with your interests? Maybe why everybody came here tonight, your lived experience and expertise, what's missing? As technology evolves, the terminology will change. It's already changed quite a bit. There's new forms of digital infrastructure that are emerging. One example of this is actually here locally in Chicago. It's known as the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park in South Shore. It's a technology park that will house the first utility scale quantum computer in the United States. And so there's elements that we can learn from data centers, but this is a unique and new digital infrastructure. And so if the terminology is confusing, it's because it's changing. If it feels overwhelming, it's because it is overwhelming. There's a lot happening. This infrastructure on the South Shore is something that organizers and residents are already mobilizing about. They're already talking. There's some groups that are advocating for a CBA, and it's impacting us here locally. There's also, I was just learning about some developments in Lake County, Yorkville. There's a lot happening just in Illinois alone. There's many resources out there. I didn't want to overwhelm with too many, but one really valuable resource is the AI Now Institute. I hyperlinked it. I can probably send out some links if folks are interested, but they have a lot of webinars. They go into a deep dive, probably one or two of my slides. They have like an hour-long session about. There's also a playbook that the Alliance for the Great Lakes published. There's a checklist, things you can ask your municipal leadership, things to look for when you hear about a proposal or if you're living near one. I read there that the Great Lakes are 20% of the world's freshwater source, and we are really a hub that's growing. You can learn more about the Power Act. It failed to pass this legislative session in Illinois. This introduces accountability measures, changes some of the tax incentives. It's very thorough, but you can learn more about that because it will likely be introduced in the next session. Okay, that's what I have to pause on for now. I would love to stay in touch. Please feel free to email me if there's a question you have that you don't get a chance to ask today, or to reach out if you have new or updated information. I always welcome feedback. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, you got some questions, young lady.
All right.
Let me get this going. I think, okay, there we go. All right, let's go with our first question. Why isn't there more of a systems thinking approach on data centers, like similar to Community Rise initiative in Lake County that looks to emphasize energy and resiliency options, economic returns, upskilling for the community? Sounds like this is like a driven by the county, delivered through edge computing and a decentralized approach, all through proven case studies and brought together with state and federal incentives. Why isn't there more of a systems thinking approach?
That is, I'm just processing the question. That is a great question. I think, trying to read it again. I don't know the specifics of RISE, and I don't know if you can respond to this, but oh, it looks like the question. Oh, I see. It's in answered. Okay, I'm just reading it. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the RISE initiative. I will look at that. I'm curious if that is specific to data centers. And if you're asking, why isn't there more of a systems thinking approach from municipal governments around data center opposition? Yeah, I would need to learn more about that. But it sounds like it would be a helpful resource. Oh, you're muted, Ashley.
I think what that is it's county-wide. So I guess what I'm kind of interested in is like there isn't a lot, it doesn't seem like a lot of government engagement with it. It's sort of like the Wild West, right? It's very economically driven. It's large businesses, but the businesses are kind of running the show. The government hasn't really gotten involved with it quite yet. So let's move on to the next question.
I will say
Go
it
ahead.
does feel like they are running the show. And if we look at the opposition efforts, there really has been a significant number of projects and funding delayed. And people vary from thinking like trying to stop altogether. And I see there's a question around that. Others are like, okay, this is here. We can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. How do we engage like systems wide with like the community benefits agreement? There is proposed upskilling. However, the challenge that I've seen with the proposed upskilling is that the proportion of jobs needed for that upskilling is small relative to the number of people that are looking for sustainable employment. So, and I also want to say it's not across the board that municipal leadership are not engaged. I think they are engaged in in many ways, and some are supportive of opposition efforts or just halting efforts. Like, we need to slow down, we need to learn. Is integration even happening as fast as it is? And then some are, proposing bills and legislation to increase development. But actually, Pritzker was in favor of the Power Act, which is a different can of worms. But yeah. Okay, next question.
Okay, I'm going to kind of jump around just because they all can kind of relate to each other, but data centers seem inevitable. Rather than protesting construction, shouldn't we be pushing for the advances to reduce the environmental impact? This is one that's about halfway down if you want to reread it.
Yeah, I can see that. Um, I'm wishing we could talk. I could like speak to people to ask more questions. I think that is one perspective that is present. I think that one of the ways we can reduce the environmental impact is be critical about the number of data centers that are being built and looking at how much is the demand a result of this race to be the tech leaders, and how much of the demand is a result of true need. A lot of this is forecasted. I do think there is a divide, and some people are organizing for both. Like, how do we stop this, and how do we reduce the environmental impact? Um, but I think this question gets at something deeper, which is that we all are looking for like the silver bullet. We're looking for the answer. We want one, like, this is what we should do. We're wasting time protesting. We should be doing this instead. Or we should be protesting and stopping this um, rather than, advancing environmental like efficiencies and efforts. And I think that there's a lot of nuance here, and where you find your spot, that's really important. I had one other thought with that. Um, and some of our greatest human rights advancements in the United States have been the result of protests, have been the result of people speaking up about harms. Um, when we think of many of the human rights that we celebrate today in the United States, it's a result of communities coming forward and saying something is wrong here, this isn't right. And I think that minimizing what communities are living through and experiencing by just painting it as inevitable, we could miss out on some really important human rights advancements that would also, one of my favorite quotes is from the late Senator Paul Wellstone, but we all do better when we all do better. So if we're listening to communities, it would also mean that we're looking at reducing the environmental impact.
One of the last question in our list, it says, can you elaborate on the concerns with community air and water quality? Like, what contaminants are we talking about? You mentioned lead briefly. How is that getting into the water?
So from what I understand, and again, I'm not a water expert, but the wastewater. So in these cooling systems, there is water, even if it is all evaporated, there's a system where they evaporate water. Um, there is still this salty wastewater known as blowdown. I don't know anything more about what blowdown consists of, that it goes and is treated in our public utilities. And some of that is also that it's not reported. We don't have transparency really this deeply into what's happening unless somebody is able to collect their first person research on the water. But that's not something I know. Um, I could look more into that, the water piece, and if I do know it, I will send it. But that is part of the transparency issue, and why a lot of it is still pretty mysterious to folks living there as well as at the municipal level.
And when you say transparency, you really just mean, uh, when there are rules, because right now there isn't any rules around how they are expected to discard of wastewater, or how much they are allowed to discard, or one of the questions here is,
Yeah.
where are they even getting it from? Are they getting it from, the same water provider that I get my water from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for breaking down transparency. That's exactly what it means. There's not even a reporting standard around how much is being used. There's no report. Like if you think of any funding stream, like I think of a grant that I've managed. I have to account for every single dollar used, where it was used, how it was used, if it wasn't used, why. Um, there's no standard for reporting. Um, and then yeah, the Great Lakes Alliance has a really great report on the water use and where it's coming from. They do give a broader scope, but they really focus on the Great Lakes region. So I would direct you to that. Um, and yeah, that's the current understanding that they're using the same resource that is used for households in the same utility treatment center.
Yeah. I do. The Alliance for, yeah, Great Alliance for the Great Lakes. Yes, whatever that organization is, they have great webinars that I've watched. They have a YouTube channel where they have things recorded that they talk about just sort of the challenges and
Mm-hmm.
where the water's coming. So that's a great resource. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Here's kind of an interesting one. What happens to the data centers when smaller hardware sort of comes along in 5 years? Are we going to be faced with the shopping mall of tomorrow where we just have these large empty spaces?
I wish I knew, but yeah, that's what's being I mean, there's just so much that we don't know, but I mean, that's where that e-waste problem is being discussed now. Um, there's also there's the shopping mall idea. There's also a concern that's emerging of developments that are in progress because of what we think is demand. That what if we get there and the demand doesn't actually reach it? That we have just these vast warehouses at semi different levels of construction. And so I think that's where folks are also like, hey, we need to halt and really assess, like, can we have an industry reporting standard? What does this currently look like? Where can we increase efficiency? The other aspect is, the conversation around renewable energy and some of the benefits and challenges that come with renewable energy in these contexts. And then, yeah, the abandoned like shopping mall concept. And then any economic effects of that. When you think about this as an industrial revolution, another wave, what have we seen in the past from extractive industry when it's left a region? That's something that could be studied and looked at.
That's really interesting. And you sort of mentioned a little bit about the tax incentives that some of these communities are providing to these developments. So say, they get stuck and they don't end up continuing on. Are they like bound with these TIF districts where the community isn't benefiting from a dilapidated structure that is taking up space?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. And that also made me think of, so again, I just finished the analysis. I'm working on this manuscript, but I did a 15-year study of publicly available documents to learn from Data Center Alley. And one of the things that came out of that um, that was new to me and isn't talked about as much, but data centers at a certain um, height, because they're so tall, the firefighting like zoning requires a certain level of a firefighting ladder that many are not equipped to have because we haven't needed them to be that tall. And so it's strained firefighting resources. And at least at the time that I read about it, there's been a huge backlog in fire trucks because of this development.
Well, there's an unintended consequence.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty
Mm-hmm.
wild. We've had a couple other questions kind of pop in. This is a good one. Why can't the government just take over the data centers? I don't know. Yeah, I don't that
Um,
sounds like a public utility. That's essentially what a lot of people are fighting for as far as internet and things like that.
in the thought of like democratizing it,
I think maybe that's what he's getting at.
because the government is involved in, you know, I guess this would be a dive that I haven't dived into that I could speak on very formally, but there are, and that's something that's specific to what's happening at the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park is that's a public-private partnership, and I think we'll start to see more of that emerging. But I think that, yeah, I'd love to know what the more of the thought behind the government running it. Oh, other than then they could regulate it. But I think what's happening is that in these city council members and, or sorry, in these city council meetings and legislative sessions, it's been hard um, to pass some of these mechanisms. So they are engaged. I think some of that would be then like constituents coming forward and speaking out about what they need. Um,
Do you see
but
this
yeah,
question about could you possibly break down how data centers are affecting the spikes in our utility bills? I think that was a big part of the power bill, wasn't it, in the state of Illinois that they wanted
yeah.
to I'll let you.
Yeah, so utilities are how utilities are broken down is highly complicated. Um, and how they're parceled out in terms of charging residents. It can be an intimidating thing to look into. Um, but essentially, there's no way to delineate um, and there's no regulation to delineate where the power is coming from. So the utilities used in an area are parceled out to the residents. And so in the absence of legislation around that or their own source, I have heard of some countries trying to run a parallel power grid so that the entity would it would be totally separated, but uh, we haven't seen that here. Um, and so right now, residents are subsidizing the cost of utility bills. And there was even like a
Locally
community meeting.
or oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there was even a community meeting in I'm on the north side of Chicago, and my alderman had a meeting of like seeing a spike in your utility bills. This is why. So when I say locally, I'm not even meaning like I don't live next to a development, but this is an area with developments, and um, it is being distributed among residents right now.
Mm.
Um,
So do you
what
think
have
that the power companies love the data centers or like are they don't you I mean it seems like they could figure out a way to charge data centers for the power that they are using and not put that cost on their consumer.
Yeah, yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, that's my orientation to it. I think there's probably a lot of efficiency gains. I think there's probably a lot of ways, but right now, um, people in power are profiting off of how it currently operates, and there is a very real demand. I mean, I'm not minimizing the impact of like, the core infrastructures also that cloud computing supports. In healthcare and education. And so I think that, but yeah, I would imagine so. I know in that study that I did, that was something that came up was figuring out with the utility companies. But I don't know much more than that.
All right. Well,
I'm
do you see any more of these questions that you'd like to answer here?
Yeah, I'm seeing the what have we learned from other countries? Are there countries that are leading in the efforts of data center construction and operations from a safe environmental perspective? Um, Yes, I don't think that's industry-wide learning necessarily, but there is a lot of learning shared um, that I think could be expanded on. I know that like Ireland has been very active in organizing around environmental protections, and we could learn a lot from them. There is one in Portugal that is on my list to learn more about, but there is not, I mean, as we know, there's not a central source of information on all of this. And I'm reading so much, and there's still, I'm left with more questions than I have answers. And so I think that um, there is probably more that we can learn from other countries, and it's finding out like how can we connect with folks that are focused on safe environmental practices moving forward, and how do we bring those learnings here? And it's not just going to happen. Like it does take each of us to bring that forward and have these, messy conversations of like, oh, that is a gap I haven't thought of, or like, oh, that's something that is new. Like we should connect on that. Um, and I think that that would be an example of one. But if you look, just even searching like global, data center opposition or environmental perspectives, there's a lot of discussion happening. I just don't see it channeled like at a strategic level, because right now I think that the political systems at play are racing. This is a huge, um, they're also calling it an arms race right now for some. And so I think that, like we talked about earlier, the environmental practices are not always incentivized economically. And in this political arms race, then sharing any efficiencies is probably restricted.
Well, how exciting. I see. Was there anything in particular that recent successful resistant wins against data centers based in the US have had in common? Um, Maybe this
Mm.
means just like around the country. I know that, I guess the wins specifically they're asking about.
I think that um, the the fact that, well, if you look at datacenterwatch.com, they just released a report from 2026, and I quoted it in my presentation, but $130 billion in projects have been delayed. Um, and when we think about the environmental costs and the harms that people are experiencing right now with the ways they currently operate, that is a huge win. And and I think that um, I think in 2024, the report was 64 billion. So the fact that there was 134 billion just in the first 3 months of 2026 shows a lot of public power right now. With this public power, we could introduce some of the things we're talking about. Um, Safer environmental practices, transparent reporting, like what is actually in our water if we're living next to a data center. You know, there this momentum really does leverage our ability to get some of the answers that are being asked right now.
I know that just kind of in my own, interest in the topic that I've
Mm.
heard that Elk Grove, I don't know if you've read about Elk Grove, but the mayor of Elk Grove is he calls him, so he says that um, he wants to make Elk Grove the data center capital of the state or something like that. And it's just interesting that, sometimes I don't want to say issues based kind of concerns, but like his concern is economic development for the community of
Mm.
Elk Grove. And if that means bringing in these data centers, then so be it. If they have the space and if they have the zoning that's available to bring it in, then why wouldn't we? But then
Mhm.
alternatively, like we talked about before the program started, this Lake County just did a moratorium, I think is the word,
Mhm.
on the development of future data centers in unincorporated areas of Lake County, which is, interesting because the county could make those decisions at the county level because it's unincorporated and they have, I guess, incentive to do so and a priority to sustainability at the county level. But it kind of just depends on the community, right? It depends on the community
Exactly.
leadership and how engaged the constituents are in yeah, the
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. It's like it can be so broad, but then it's so context specific. I did not hear that about Elk Grove, but I randomly drove through Elk Grove like a month ago and was like, holy cow, there's so many data centers here. I do
Well,
not
really?
remember this. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's their whole claim to fame right now. I've seen it in the Daily
Wow.
Herald multiple times over the last just couple months because a lot of the people in the community are like, "Wait a minute, we didn't sign up to be this." And he's like,
Interesting.
"Why wouldn't we be this?" So, I mean, I'm not making it an opinion either way. It's interesting to see how these different leaders in different towns are taking it and thinking about it in the ways that they do. So, anyways, Rachel,
Yeah.
we are over time. This has been wonderful. I'm so happy that we were able to work this out. And again, thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak to us. And if you wouldn't mind sending me those links that you had mentioned, and then I
Hmm.
will be sure to send the recording of this session out to everybody that registered, and along with putting it on the library's YouTube channel. So thank you again, and good luck on your dissertation and all of your research. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right. Good night, everybody.